Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I am pleased to be able to take part in this report stage debate on Bill C-21 to give my voice and to speak to my residents in Cowichan, Malahat, Langford. I have had an intimate amount of experience with this bill, having been the former public safety critic, and I have seen just how much time this bill has taken up at the Public Safety Committee. A lot of people forget that the Public Safety Committee is also called the Public Safety and National Security Committee, and there have been important pieces of legislation held up at that because of the inordinate amount of time that C-21 has occupied. And of course, you know, things were going actually quite well for C-21 up until those very ill-advised 11th hour amendments landed on the committee's desk with no warning. And that is when the whole process got completely derailed. And I'm thankful, due to a lot of pressure from opposition parties, that the government finally saw sense in February and withdrew the problematic amendments that were going to really impact so many hunters, so many farmers and Indigenous communities, because those, it was quite obvious, they had landed with no consultation, had completely taken committee members by surprise, and were not, frankly speaking, backed up by any kind of witness testimony that we had heard at committee. Because up until that point, C-21 had primarily been about a handgun freeze. There were some provisions in the bill dealing with red flag laws, yellow flag laws. There was a section covering airsoft and so on. But those amendments just completely expanded the scope of the bill. So they were withdrawn, and that's an important point to underline here, because I have been listening to the speeches on C-21 for most of the day today, and particularly the ones that come from my Conservative colleagues. And a lot of their speeches have to do with standing up for hunters, for farmers, for Indigenous communities, all very admirable things to stand in this House and say and do. But the problem, Madam Speaker, is that their speeches are muddying the waters because they are alluding to amendments that are no longer part of the bill. Exactly. Now, in several questions today during debate, Madam Speaker, I have challenged my Conservative colleagues to name one rifle or one kind of shotgun that is going to be prohibited by C-21, and they have all deflected and changed the channel to go onto safer ground that is buoyed by their own talking points. And you know why, Madam Speaker? Because they can't. They cannot name a rifle or shotgun that is going to be banned by C-21 because it is not in there. Exactly. Instead of reading Conservative talking points, I'm going to actually read the bill. And the important thing here, Madam Speaker, for everyone who is listening to this debate is the new definition of a prohibited firearm. The key clause here, Madam Speaker, is as follows, and I'm going to read it into the record. Is designed and manufactured on or after the day on which this paragraph comes into force. In other words, Madam Speaker, current makes and models that are legally owned by licensed firearms owners are not touched by this bill. Yes. Underlined with an exclamation mark. They are not touched. They are still going to be legal. It is only for makes and models that are designed and manufactured and come onto the market after C-21 comes into force. Now I hear about Conservatives going on about, oh, but what about the Firearms Advisory Committee? You know, it's going to be, you know, stocked with Liberal appointees, and they're going to make advice, and they're going to suggest that certain makes and models be banned. Madam Speaker, that is a complete red herring. There's a red herring, and I'll tell you why. Because the government already has the power under the criminal code to reclassify firearms by cabinet decree. Yep. That is something that has been abused by both Conservative and Liberal governments. How the heck do we think we got the May 2020 order in council which listed those 1,500 firearms? That certainly wasn't done with the aid of a Firearms Advisory Committee. That was the Liberal government, by cabinet decree, through the Canada Gazette, suddenly making a list of firearms, and it was done under existing authority of the criminal code. I'm actually glad there will be a Firearms Advisory Committee, because finally we'll have someone at the cabinet table advising the minister, who may come from an Indigenous background, may come from a hunting background, may come from a sport shooting background. Why is that a bad thing to have these people maybe providing a sober second thought on any kind of decision that the government, again, already has the power to do? So complete red herrings, and everything that the Conservatives has said so far about popular hunting or shotgun rifles, like shotguns, are in fact going to stay legal. In fact, Madam Speaker, I look forward to going to my local Canadian Tire and Outfitting store on the day after C-21 receives royal assent to show all the different makes and models that are still on sale. Now, there was a disappointment that I had with this bill. I, of course, put forward an amendment at committee that was going to amend the section of the bill that provided an exemption to people from the handgun freeze. I felt that the current definition that allowed only people who were at Olympic level and Paralympic level to have an exception from the handgun freeze, I thought that was too narrow. I put forward amendments to that effect to expand it so that it would have been expanded to the International Practical Shooting Confederation or the Single Action Shooting Society. And you know what? That amendment actually almost passed. It almost passed because the Liberal member for Kings Hants actually made a great intervention at committee where he supported my amendment, but when it came to crunch time, he abstained. Wow. And so on this critical amendment, when he had a chance to show his constituents that he was actually going to sway this important part of the bill, he abstained. And as a result, it ended up in a 5-5 tie at committee, and of course it was broken by the chair. So we came very close to amending that specific section of the bill. And the reason why I back this up, Madam Speaker, is because during witness testimony, we heard from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and their public statement on this was, and I quote, "We believe that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing access to these types of firearms while allowing existing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport." So that is I took great heart from that statement from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. We had Chief Evan Bray as a witness, and he backed that up. So they do believe in a handgun freeze, but they thought there should be exemptions to allow people to continue their sport shooting. Now, we are at the report stage, and I want to address a very confusing Conservative report stage amendment to C-21. So I was reviewing that, and I look at motion number 12, which has been put forward by the Conservative member for Kildonan and St. Paul, and it's shocking because the Conservatives are actually seeking to entirely delete Clause 43 from the bill.
Shame.
Why is that important, Madam Speaker? Because Clause 43 is the only part of C-21 that provides an exception to the handgun freeze. It provides an exception to anyone who has an authorization to carry and to people who are training, competing, or coaching in a handgun shooting discipline under the International Olympic Committee. So
that's crazy.
For some reason, the Conservatives want to delete the exemptions to the handgun freeze from the bill. And many of their other report stage amendments that they're seeking to delete are ones that they in fact played a very constructive role at committee in helping amend. So they're all over the map here on report stage. It's quite clear that Conservatives are flailing around, and it's quite evident from their speeches today.
Yes.
I do want to address briefly ghost guns. This was a big ask from law enforcement. We had Inspector Michael Rowe, Staff Sergeant from the Vancouver Police Department, who did mention that, the barrels, slides, and trigger assemblies, these are a big issue for law enforcement. The advent of 3D printing has allowed a lot of firearms to come onto the market which are completely untraceable. And as the member for New Westminster Burnaby has stated in this House, their growth has gone exponential. So law enforcement have very clearly asked for this amendment to C-21, and I am glad to see that the committee responded in kind. I also want to salute our efforts, the NDP's efforts to save airsoft. It was my amendment that passed that deleted the offending section of C-21 so the airsoft community can continue to play their sport and they will not be impacted by C-21. So I want to thank committee members for allowing that part of the bill to pass. I will end too, Madam Speaker, by also saying that there was a really important amendment added to the bill which recognizes that Section 35 of the Constitution Act, which of course upholds the rights of Indigenous peoples, C-21 will not impact that, and it was important to have that clarification in the bill. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
The member questioned why Conservatives are talking to deleted parts of the bill, Madam Speaker. That's because these speeches were written for them months ago, and when they write those speeches, they write them with the intention of the maximum fundraising capabilities at the time. So I hope that that clarifies it for the member. And you know, we see time after time Conservatives getting up and spreading misinformation about this bill, Madam Speaker, and it is with the objective of nothing other than to raise money off of it. I'm really glad to see that there are adults in the room, including the NDP and the Bloc and the Liberals and the Green, that are actually standing up for the best interests of Canadians. I'm wondering if the member would like to comment on that.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan Mellowhett Langford.
Well, you know, I spoke to this last week when we were debating Motion 25, and I made reference to the fact that for the Conservatives, Bill C-21 is the goose that lays the golden eggs. And that is why they have wanted to see it stuck in the House, because that hoovering sound you hear, Madam Speaker, that is the sound of the Conservative Party's fundraising machine raking in millions of dollars off of this bill. And so I am, for one, am glad to see that the committee has sent it back to the House, because there are two other important bills waiting to be heard. Bill C-20, important RCMP oversight, and Bill C-26, which is going to look at cybersecurity. Both very pressing issues, and it's high time the Public Safety Committee got to work in addressing those other key issues.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This gives me a chance to start by correcting my colleague from Kingston's observations about speeches written weeks ago. The heartfelt commentary from my colleague about hunting on Manitoulin Island were not written for him by a speechwriter who has never been to Manitoulin Island. With regard to the fundraising issue, I'm not sure that's actually true that it raises all this money, but if it does, and given the fact that in Canada there are very strict limits on how much money can be raised per individual, doesn't it make the point that thousands of Canadians care very deeply about this issue and are alarmed at seeing their way of life destroyed and their property taken away from them by a government that is unconcerned with their well-being? Doesn't that explain why the money is being raised? Doesn't it also explain why the NDP has such difficulty raising money on any issue that it represents?
The Honourable Member for Cowichan Mellowhett Langford.
Well, Madam Speaker, as we have heard of the public's...
See, there's other individuals who seems to want to ask questions or make comments. I would ask them to please hold off, because it's not their turn. I did not recognize them. The Honourable Member for Cowichan Mellowhett Langford.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Conservatives have learned their lessons from Facebook, and Facebook knows how to raise a lot of money because they keep on pressing the emotional button on people. And so this is a party that has become experts in rage farming. That's what they do. They churn it out, they take videos out of context, and it's all to get people hopping up and down mad about blatant mistruths. So yes, they have taken great lessons from Twitter, from Facebook, from everyone who's become expert on this, and they have become masters of keeping people angry so that they can rake in the cash. So I'll take no lessons from them on that.
There's still some going back and forth, and I don't know that the conversation is actually to the member. It seems to be more across the way. So I would again ask members to please not interrupt when others are speaking. Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Avignon, Amitis, Matane, Matapedia. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, normally in this House, the NDP agrees with almost everything the government does. They're a little bit like the farm team for the Liberals, except on one element, and the member explained this very well in his speech, the amendment that he tabled in committee for a larger exemption for sport shooters. He wanted to include some groups in that, including the International Practical Shooting Confederation. And to exempt those groups, that would have created a huge loophole. It would have made the freeze completely useless. So to hear the NDP say we're in favor of better control of firearms, but then to see them come to committee with that kind of amendment, I have a hard time understanding why they would want to exempt the largest number of sport shooters as possible. And, his measure almost passed. So I'd like to understand the NDP's position on that. Are they for better control of firearms or against?
Cowichan Malahat Langford has 40 seconds to respond.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Madam Speaker. I mean, I have spoken to sport shooters, and they just simply want to be able to continue their sport. And I would redirect my honourable colleague to the testimony that we had from none other than the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. They said that a handgun freeze is absolutely one method of reducing access to these types of firearms. But they also qualify that by saying they also support allowing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport. So, Madam Speaker, the NDP is on the same side as the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police.